Hello and welcome back to another video. We have provisional patch notes for patch 14 coming up. There is no date on this patch drop just yet, so it could be in an hour, it could be in 5 months. We'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully it comes before the anniversary of the game so that we can get some real juicy content for the anniversary update, which should come near the end of November. Hopefully some new maps, but again, we'll have to wait and see. Surprisingly, these patch notes come in 3 parts, which is a bit crazy, and it's starting to look like it's a case of someone put on their CV that they're proficient with Microsoft Office, but it's looking like they're not. I'm pretty sure the parts could have been lessened if they used line spacing better. Alas, we have giant lists of update changes in part 2 and part 3, and the spacing in them is absolutely horrid, and yeah, I'm pretty sure they could have reduced that down to 2 parts, but we'll just move on from that and get into the real meaty stuff, which comes at the start in part 1. So, devoted rejects, today we're sharing with you the provisional notes for our next patch. Patch 14. This update will mainly be comprised of needed balance changes and bug fixes from the class rework in patch 13. Just to make sure you're aware, these notes and changes are not final and may still be changed before the release. We will release the final patch notes when we deploy patch 14, which may come at a later date. These notes contain the second part of changes based on community testing that we've had with select members of the community the past 2 months, and adjustments to live issues that have appeared. We once again want to thank the community members for their continued help with improving areas of the game that need extra attention. Let's jump right into it. We have operative modifiers suppression boost being increased from 5% to 25%. This sounds to be whenever you have suppression boosts on your characters, they're just going to be boosted by the base suppression boost on the character itself, which is nice. Hopefully not too much for ranged attacks, because when you're the veteran, you don't want enemies to be ducking and diving and taking cover, because you want to kill them. And if they're hiding behind cover, well, you can't kill them. But now, we jump into the Psyker, where for the Blitz, they have set wield quell chain time to 0 on all of them, meaning it will be more fluid to start quelling after switching to your Blitz. Not too bad, just means we're going to be more fluid in gameplay, more fluid in combat. We'll be able to do things a lot faster, which is nice. So, we've got changes for the Brain Rupture. Reduced peril cost of charging right-click from 30% to 20%, reduced movement penalties from charging, increased power from 850 to 900, increased unyielding armor damage modifier from 1 to 1.25, increased maniac armor damage modifier from 1 to 1.5, increased carapace armor damage modifier from 0.75 to 1, and fixed an issue where Brain Burst or Brain Rupture would cause an explosion even with the talent Empowered Psionics active. So we've just got some lovely damage buffs going on for the Brain Rupture, got armor modifiers for Unyielding, Maniac and Carapace, which is basically covering most of our elite enemies, at least the bigger ones. We've got Mutants, Ragers, Crushers, Bulwarks and Monstrosities, and a little bit extra damage from 850 to 900, which should help us smash some breakpoints, which is quite nice. And if you pre-charge your Brain Burst, which I don't do very often, the peril cost for doing so is been reduced by 10%. Not too bad at all, just means Brain Rupture is a bit more powerful than it was prior. And we have our next Blitz, which is Assail, which I haven't used very much in the game just yet. But I know a lot of you have, and you'll have to let me know how you feel about the changes down below. But let's get into them. Shifting Power. To reduce spamminess of primary attack, but increase the usability of the secondary aimed attack. So they've reduced power of primary action from 250 to 200. They've increased power of secondary action, which is aimed throw, from 250 to 340 or 400 if the talent Empowered Psionics is active. Just for reference, Empowered Psionics is one of the keystones that allows you to empower your Blitz ability to make it do some extra damage or modifiers. They fixed an issue where Assail projectiles would lose targeting when 4 swords are wielded. They fixed an issue that could cause the animation and action for Assail to be stuck if you were attacked while aiming a shard. And they fixed an issue where Assail would play critical strike sounds globally and in 3D. So that means a little nerf to throwing it instantly with primary action, but you get a little buff if you're more focused and want to aim and target specific enemies with the secondary attack. On the face of it, it seems like a mute sort of nerf. It means you're going to be less throwing them really quickly. with primary attack, but more just holding right click and then spamming it with right click to get extra strong shards, so we'll have to see how that works in the game. Then we have Smite, where they fixed a couple of issues. The first one is where the ability didn't show hit indicators when damaging enemies, and then they've corrected where the VFX clouds kept triggering during the secondary attack. And there's a minor dev note where Smite being able to channel without cost when Empowered Psionics was active was a bug. But they do, however, feel that without it, Smite can feel a bit lackluster, in combination with Empowered Psionics. So we're further increasing the power of it. We'll be keeping an eye on it, and are up for doing something related to cost in the future, as long as it's more balanced this time around. So that was a pretty strong bug that was going around where you could essentially channel Smite indefinitely, which meant you could completely incapacitate enemies and make them absolutely useless on the battlefield, making your team kill everything for absolute free. So it'll be interesting to see how Smite handles after this. They've increased the power a bit, but if that bug's still not there, then I feel like its utility will still be quite powerful in the game, as it still will stun a big area of enemies, which is the most useful thing it does, especially if there's a Crusher squad, for example. Just means you're going to be able to clear those enemies quite easily. So the buffs to the Empowered Smite will be, they've increased it to 125% damage, and they've given it a 50% faster spread between enemies. So it's doing a little bit more damage, and it spreads faster across enemies. Yeah, we'll have to see how this looks in game. Not really sure myself, as I didn't use it very often. And they just mentioned where they fixed the issue where it incorrectly made Smite not cost any peril. Next up, we have notes for our first combat ability, Psykinetics Wrath. They've added a 10% quell to base Psykinetics Wrath ability, meaning that Psykers who don't have the upgraded Psykinetics Wrath can still use the ability to avoid downing themselves. So this is the combat ability where you push a nice wave of warp energy into the fray. It's the old one that we had pre-patch that was able to keep you alive once you were overloading yourself with peril. And it looks like they're just adding that to the base ability so that you can always continuously do that, which is very nice. It means you will have to spec into an extra modifier for the ability to be able to keep saving yourself if you overloaded with peril. Very nice. That's a nice little buff. Moving on to Scryer's Gaze, they fixed an issue where sound effects were not turned on and off properly when activating Scryer's Gaze. That's decent enough, little bug fix. Before getting into Telekine Shield and Telekine Dome, which we have a lot of little notes. So they've increased the speed of Telekine Shield and Dome, placement action. They've increased the max duration of the shield from 15 seconds to 17.5 and the dome from 15 seconds to 22.5. They've increased the health of the shield and the dome from 15 to 20, and the maximum duration of both of them from 4 seconds to 6.5 seconds. So there's a lot of buffs coming in for the shield abilities. They're going to last for longer, shield for more damage, and they're going to be a little bit quicker to deploy as well. Great flat buffs coming in for the shields. I've still not used them in game, but they're very, very big for team survivability. And we just have a plethora of bug fixes to go along with it. So they fixed an issue where it's not being able to place the shield on certain flat areas. They fixed an issue where the Warp Siphon talent granted an instant cooldown of the Telekine Shield and Dome. So there was many times where I saw the dome placed out many millions of times across the battlefield, so you'll no longer be able to spam them like that, which is an overpowered interaction, so not the end of the world that that's been fixed. They fixed an issue where enemy hits on the shield and dome abilities could be seen through enemies. Fixed an issue where impacts on the Telekine Field and Dome abilities were not vanishing. And finally, they fixed an issue causing sound effects to not trigger correctly when entering/exiting a Telekine Dome. Just a whole host of bug fixes for the domes and shields there. Good stuff. Just means we're going to have, you know, a more working mechanic in the game. And we've just got some changes to certain talents on the tree. So for Soul Stealer, they've reduced the toughness replenishment from 15 toughness to 7.5%. So that's a pretty horrible big nerf for Soul Stealer. Rest in peace being able to remain invulnerable using the Purgatus in Horde Clear, as well as the Void Strike with large groups of enemies as well. I suppose in situations where you're killing enemies in hordes, you're still going to feel Soul Stealer being very strong, but in the case where it's single enemies, it's going to be a lot weaker at 50% less. We've got Perilous Combustion, where they've reduced the numbers of Soul Blaze stacks applied to nearby enemies on elite or specialist kills from 4 to 3, so that's a flat nerf of 1 Soul Blaze stack. I didn't use it myself as Soul Blaze stacks don't really do that much damage, but it was pretty fun to stack them a lot, but I did see that later in the patch notes they're reducing the amount of elite enemies that spawn on the map, so it's kind of turned out to be a more powerful nerf because of that change. Not the end of the world. I'm pretty sad to see that that's been taken down. And we have one more change for pre-science, where they've increased the critical hit chance bonus from 5% from 4, and the aura kinetic presence reduced the damage bonus from 10 to 5%. So kinetic presence gave the team a damage bonus of 10% to elite and specialist enemies, and now that's going down to 5%. So they've halved that. That means that the aura is not amazing anymore, really. And there's this kind of a theme with the auras. They're nerfing all the auras. The veteran ones, for example, are all really, really bad. One of them only giving 3% damage to the team, which is negligible. 5% is quite negligible as well. It's not something that's going to be noticed very much in the gameplay. So I'm pretty sad to see that be reduced. Oh well. Now we move on to the Zealot, with our Blades of Faith Blitz coming up first. They've tweaked the knife throw to make it more consistent and easier to hit priority targets, by adding a small cleave to be able to cleave through one small enemy, and they've reduced the projectile radius from 0.37 to 0.2 to make it easier to hit priority targets in hordes and avoid accidentally hitting smaller targets. They've also fixed it so Blades of Faith don't inherit speed modifiers from wielding ranged weapons, so that means they should go straight now. So just a bit of quality of life change for the Blades of Faith there. Just means you're going to be able to aim more specifically for your target, and it's not going to accidentally clip a hitbox of a different enemy and waste the knife entirely. Good change overall there. They've increased the power from 500 to 585 to help reach some weak spot breakpoints, as well as increasing the flak armor damage modifier from 0.75 to 0.8, and they fixed minor animation issues. So lots of quality of life changes for the Blades of Faith, as well as a flat damage increase and a flak armor damage modifier boost as well. So that's going to do a lot more damage and be a lot easier to hit those targets that you're wanting to hit with it. Good stuff. And there's no more Blitz updates for the Zealot, but we've got our combat ability Shroud Field, which has changes. The talent Perfectionist has been nerfed, where they've reduced the backstab damage bonus from 100% to 50%, but changed the cooldown increase from 100% to 50%, so the cooldown punishment is lower. This was made to avoid single target hits doing too much damage. So, you can no longer one-shot Beasts of Nurgle with the Thunderhammer. You can no longer almost one-shot Plague Ogrins and Chaos Spawns. It's with how fast it is to get Shroud Field back up and running with the cooldown nodes. Yeah, I could see why this nerf's come in. It's pretty insane being able to one-shot an enemy every 30 seconds, you know, taking into account grabbing cooldown reduction from the extra augmentations you have later in the tree. So it's a little bit sad to see that go, but it's probably needed to stop crazy overpowered interactions happening too often. They've changed the finesse damage bonus from being multiplicative to additive, and demon hosts will now be able to see zealots using Shroud Field to avoid cases where players can aggro a demon host and make it attack other players. Great change. We're going to see less griefing. It was the only grief mechanic that was added. Be going invisible and the demon host goes, well, he's gone. You're going to target your mate. Now if you go invisible, that demon host's going to lock onto you. It can see you no matter what's happening, so no escaping demon hosts now. And we move on to our next combat ability, where Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude has been changed a little bit. They've added functionality to cancel the ability with the secondary action input. They've changed action chaining so they are not allowed to cancel out of the ability during wielding animation. This is to avoid accidental cancelling of the ability before it is started. And they've changed it so that monstrosities are only staggered by the first and last pulse of the ability. I've fallen victim to accidentally cancelling the ability many times, so it's good to see that they're tweaking that a little bit so it happens a lot less. And pushing monstrosities off ledges was a very popular mechanic, and it's being incredibly nerfed. I think you might still be able to push them off, but they're going to have to be at the very edge of the area for you to push them off ledges with this ability now. Which is probably a sad thing many people are going to see going, but it's not the end of the world. It was a very, very, very strong mechanic, and yeah, they don't want people to steamroll through things too easily, do they now? Now we have talent changes for the Zealot, where Inexorable Judgment now only activates on melee and ranged hits. I'm not sure what hits aren't melee or ranged. You'll have to let me know what interaction that used to have beforehand, because to me it just seems like a minor change that I'm personally not going to notice. Second Wind, they've added a 0.5 second internal cooldown and increased the toughness replenishment from 10% to 15%. So Second Wind is the ability where if you get a successful dodge, you get a percentile amount of toughness, so they've increased the amount that you get from 10 to 15%, but it means you can't continuously dodge constantly to get that buff. So there's a 0.5 seconds cooldown on that now, which isn't massive, but it means you won't be able to chain it constantly. So there's a nerf and a buff to balance it out. Not too bad. Not the end of the world there. Good stuff. Our next talent change is Shield of Contempt, where they've reduced the damage reduction from 75% to 60%. So this is when an ally in Coherency would take damage, they'd get a buff for 4 seconds. This buff used to be 75% toughness damage reduction, and now it's 60%, which is a pretty substantial nerf, but it's not something you're going to feel a lot in the game. Your teammates may moan about it a little bit, but the interaction was probably much too strong for them, and clearly it has. It's been nerfed. That's not the end of the world. For Bleed for the Emperor, they've reduced damage reduction from 50 to 40, so this is where you would get damage reduction on bleed stacks, and that has been nerfed by 10%. And they say that these slight changes to damage reduction talents are to avoid high stacking damage reduction. High stacking damage reduction really only happens if you move your tree in a very specific way to select all of them, which will bypass a lot of damage and other kind of interactions that are quite strong. It's not so bad, you won't really feel the changes that strongly. If you go for Bleed for the Emperor and don't stack other damage reduction, it is going to feel a little bit sour, but that's not the end of the world, I suppose. They've fixed the talent, Martyr's Purpose having the wrong icon, and they fixed an issue where Beacon of Purity Aura could leave players with remaining corruption damage, so you used to have like a small tick of 1 damage of corruption, so that's gone now. And they fixed issues where the talent Sainted Gunslinger didn't activate when reloading combat shotguns or stub revolvers. Good stuff. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the Veteran. We're hoping to see some good stuff in here, because the Veteran right now is trash. Yes, I said it, the Veteran sucks. Here we go. We are currently working on an update to the Veteran's talent tree, including keystones. Yes! We're getting keystones. How boring is it that we go through 3 talent trees, keystones, we've got new abilities, new passives to proc, get to the Veteran tree and there's none. It's boring, lame. This is amazing. Absolutely everything we needed to hear. Let's see if they keep giving us good news. The keystones will be coming in a future patch. We hope that these changes to your abilities will still be interesting enough and open up for a few more build paths while we finalise the larger update. So it sounds like we're going to get some more changes. Let's read on. They've reduced veteran stamina regeneration delay from 1.25 to 1, meaning veterans will start regeneration of stamina quicker than before. Very, very nice. Means you're going to be able to get back up into sprinting faster, blocking easier, getting your melee in a lot more as well. So very nice little base stamina regeneration delay buff for you there. Good stuff. We have buffs for the smoke grenade, where they've added a small stagger to the grenade explosion, and the duration has increased from 10 seconds base and 15 seconds with Grenade Tinkerer talent to 15 seconds base and 30 seconds with the Grenade Tinkerer talent. So the smoke grenade before did seem extremely lackluster, something I'd probably never pick. To be honest, I probably still won't pick it, but it's good to see that it's going to stagger enemies and the explosion, and the duration has been increased quite substantially, especially with Grenade Tinkerer. Good stuff. And we have the Crack Grenade. They've changed the behavior of the talent Twinned Blast, which is the talent that makes it so you get 10% chance to throw 2 grenades beforehand. 1 grenade will now land where aimed, and the duplicate grenade will land in a random position nearby, left or right of the aimed position. So this is an interesting interaction, an interesting little change. I suppose this might be because the crack grenades have a tendency to whiz around like the golden snitch from Harry Potter. Could mean that you get a connection on your main target and then a connection on a target beside it. I think that might be what they were going for. To be honest, Twinned Blast is a pretty trash ability, as if you watched my talent tree die for the Veteran, it took me over 30 throws to get a proc from Twinned Blast. Now, I do understand that it is luck-based, that it's a percentile chance. In my experience, it's not worth it. Just pick something else. The one time this procs is going to be amazing. You'll spend half a match trying to get it to proc, and you'll be sad about having picked it in the first place. Now we have Holy Grail changes. Changes to the combat ability Volley Fire or Executioner's Stance. They've allowed the cooldown to tick during the activation of the ability, but they've increased the cooldown from 25 to 35 seconds, meaning achieving a higher uptime on Volley Fire will reward you more. So this is an absolutely amazing change. I don't know why they got rid of it in the first place. This just means that when you activate the ability, the cooldown for the ability will start and it'll start ticking down whilst you have the ability active. It means if you were to engage in some ranged combat with a lot of shooters, you activate the ability. If you are able to keep the ability active for 35 seconds, and then you come out of Executioner's Stance, you can activate the ability straight away again. This was an interaction that we had pre-patch. Getting rid of it felt really sour. This is going to be really, really strong for the veteran. It's an incredible buff that we had before and we're getting back. I'm very, very happy to see this. Talent Counterfire has added Scab Stalkers as volley fire targets. Also an absolutely massive buff for the veteran. Scab Stalkers look like shooters, but they're not, or weren't technically discerned as shooters by the game. So pre-patch and post-patch, if you activate volley fire or Executioner's Stance, a lot of the time you'd realise that a lot of shooters, you thought they were shooters, didn't get highlighted, and you got a very sour feeling that you've just wasted your volley fire. Well, now Scab Stalkers will be highlighted, which means every single ranged enemy is highlighted by the ability, so you'll never have a point where you activate it and you're like, oh, that was a dud. Poop. Amazing buff. Veterans, rejoice. We're going to be strong again. I feel it. I feel it. So they fixed issues where Volley Adept and Executioner's Stance didn't activate when reloading combat shotguns or stub revolvers. So a nice little bug fix for you shotgun and revolver users there. That's the end of the Executioner's Stance buffs, and man, oh man, am I happy to see these. I can't wait to jump into the game. This is going to help my upcoming build videos so much. Stay tuned for those. We've got our combat ability Infiltrate, where just like Shroudfield, demon hosts will be able to see you, and it's going to avoid where players can aggro demon host and make it attack other players. Just a nice little griefing change slash fix there. They've reduced the infiltrate cooldown from 60 to 45 seconds, and they've increased its duration from 6 to 8 seconds. Now this is good because it means you'll be able to do it more often and you'll be able to remain in it for longer, but to be honest, I still think that infiltrate's pretty meh. At least for me it's pretty meh. When I'm a veteran, I want to shoot things, don't want to sneak around, so not something I care about that much. They've changed Voice of Command, which is our third combat ability, by reducing the cooldown from 45 to 30 seconds, and added a stronger stagger, which means you'll now be able to stagger monstrosities and mutants. A decent buff there. They've reduced the cooldown, you'll be able to do it quite a substantial amount more, and being able to stagger monstrosities and mutants is pretty large, as mutants can really pinch you in really bad situations, and monstrosities are, you know, they just like to bug you to death, so being able to stagger those and give you a moment to breathe is pretty big. The buffs go on. So for the talent, Only in Death Does Duty End, they've increased the cooldown increase from 33% to 50% with the reduced cooldown of Voice of Command. This adds up as the same 15 seconds extra cooldown, so it's a non-change really. They just kind of balanced that out. Not too shabby, I suppose, but I'm probably not going to use Voice of Command. All you Voice of Command users that want to cosplay as commissars, getting a nice little buff to the ability. Now for the talent Duty and Honor. They've increased toughness gained from 50 to 100 and the duration from 10 to 15. And they fixed an issue where the ability didn't play sound effects. So that's a flat buff to an augmentation of Voice of Command. It means that all of your teammates are going to get an extra 50 toughness, which can exceed your maximum amount of toughness to give you an extra little boost. Pretty decent. Duration's gone up as well. It's a little bit more supportive than it was before. The talent Deadshot has been moved from a percentage of max stamina to a flat stamina of 0.75 stamina per second or 0.25 per shot. So that's a very nice buff for Deadshot. It's not an ability I used very often, but it gives you a nice large amount of crit chance if you're going for those critical hit stacks. They've changed Exploit Weakness, where they've increased the brittleness stacks from 2.5% to 10%, but they've set the max stacks to 2. The description currently reads rending, but it should say brittleness. So it was never rending before, and they've changed it so the max stacks is now 2 instead of 16, which means you get 20% brittleness rather than 40% rending. Overall, this is quite a substantial nerf, I suppose, but you will stack the 20% much faster than stacking all of the stacks of 2.5%. So it's the potential of it has been nerfed, but the immediate effect has been buffed. We'll have to wait to see how that works out in game. It sounds like a decent change, I suppose, especially if it was already brittleness in the first place, but I suppose we'll have to wait and see. And they've nerfed the talent Rending Strikes from 15% to 10% rending to all weapons. They mentioned with the class overhaul, we also changed how rending was calculated, resulting in it being more effective than before. This resulted in Rending Strikes being stronger than we anticipated. So 15% rending to all weapons was a very, very strong talent pick, and they've just nerfed that by 5% just to reduce its potency a little bit. And we move on to the talent Keep Their Hands Down, where they've increased the ranged attack suppression from 25 to 50%, so that's a substantial buff to this talent node, though I'm still not going to pick it because I'd rather kill my enemies than have them run away and hide behind cover. It's pretty good if you're running in the fray and getting close range kills, because then they'll quiver in front of you and start running instead of shooting, but I'm more of a veteran that likes to shoot from a distance, which means this is going to be a detriment to me. If it works for your playstyle, it's a nice substantial buff for you there. For Talent Demolition Team, they've corrected the description to state only the veteran receives a grenade. The gameplay change was already in, but the description didn't get updated properly. So your team's not going to get a grenade now, it just means that only you will get the grenades, sadly. It was already in the game, so it didn't give you team grenades, but they've stopped deceiving us now. It's pretty sad that the team doesn't get those grenades as well. I suppose it does stack up to be quite an overpowered talent node. Overall, the entire team's got a chance to stack grenades on elite kills. Sad to go, but not the end of the world. Now we move on to the Ogryn, our final class, and let's see what buffs or nerfs we have here. So for our big friendly rock blitz, they've reduced the replenish cooldown from 60 to 45 seconds. That's already beautiful, means you're going to throw more rocks. They've increased the maniac damage, great stuff. They've increased the impact versus monstrosities. Stones thrown to the head of monstrosities will now stagger them, very, very beautiful. And they've lowered chaining time from the wield to the aim throw. This will reduce the amount of time until the player can throw the stone, allowing for more reactive gameplay. So you're able to whip the rock out, dash it in someone's face a lot faster, and it's going to do more damage to maniacs. You'll be able to regenerate them faster, and monstrosities are going to get staggered by it if you lob it at their face. Overall, a very, very nice little buff to the big friendly rock. And it looks like we've got frag bomb buffs. Man, I love this. This is my favourite blitz ability in the game. So let's read on to see what we're going to get. Armor modifiers, close damage, near, far. Unyielding has gone from... The formatting of this is strange. It reads a bit weird. So if... Actually, I don't really understand this at all. 75%, 35 to 100, 37.5. I wish this was more readable. I mean, it's quite late at night, which is probably not helping me and get my head around this. Please can you clarify this in the comments, because you probably have your head on straight. At the moment of recording, my head is too combusted to understand what the hell this means. Essentially, I think the frag bomb is getting a nice decent buff to unyielding and carapace armored enemies. Pretty decent, but I can't really wrap my head around exactly what it means. But yeah, we'll move on to our first combat ability for the Ogryn, Loyal Protector, which is our taunt. They fixed an issue where a demon host was behaving weirdly after a Loyal Protector activation, and fixed an issue where the ability didn't play sounds for other players. Yeah, decent little bug fixes there. Our Point Blank Barrage, which is our Daka Daka buff. They fixed an issue where the ability would not trigger talent reloaded and ready, and the talent Light 'em Up has been reduced from 3 burn stacks to 2. So a little nerf for Light 'em Up. It was super duper duper strong, and so they're just reducing the potency of that ability. Funny interactions, but the gameplay with that is going to be a little bit more realistic now, I suppose. The talent Batter has been nerfed as well, where they've reduced the number of bleed stacks applied from heavy attacks from 6 to 4, which is quite a substantial nerf to those, but they were very, very strong earlier. But I imagine they'll still be quite strong, just means you're going to have to hit enemies a little longer. And they've changed the Pained Outburst talent, where they've fixed an issue where the talent would return 100% toughness instead of 25%, and would replenish toughness if knocked down. So it looks like Pained Outburst just had a pretty crazy buff, a bugged buff, and they've just fixed that. And that brings us to the end of the class buffs and nerfs. We've got some really, really powerful buffs in there. I think I'm focusing mainly on the veteran ones, specifically to Volifier and Executioner's Stance. I can't wait to see what the keystones are going to be for this tree. Very, very excited. And there's a couple of other beautiful buffs and nerfs as well. But next up, we have tweaks to the enemies. So they've tweaked enemy base health on all difficulties, with focus on bigger elites to make them stay alive a bit longer, and for the conflict director to not spawn as many. So they're not going to spawn as many elites, but they've made them have more HP. What does this sound like? This sounds like elite resistance. Obviously it's not elite resistance, and it's something that's just a flat change to the entire game. This is the sort of game that I like quantity more of, rather than more, you know. We'll have to see how this change works, especially with weapon buffs coming soon as well. But on paper, I'm not really a fan. But we shall see. It could mean really no difference to gameplay, but on the face of it, yeah, I'm not a big fan. They've increased mutants' health from 1,900 to 2,000. They've changed Bulwark base health from 1,500 to 1,800, which is the same for Crusher base health as well. Dragon Scab Rager's base health has been increased by 400 from 800 to 1,200. Mauler's base health has been increased from 1,200 to 1,500. And they've added a new backstab sound for elites. So when an elite is about to absolutely smash you in the face, you're going to get a nice different sound effect. It'd be pretty funky to see what that sounds like. They've increased heavy stagger threshold for Crushers, Maulers, and Reapers, so it means you'll be able to stagger them less. I think Crushers have already seemingly got a pretty strong stagger resistance buff since the patch notes, which has made them quite a horrible force to fight. And they've increased that now for Maulers and Reapers as well. So, we'll have to see how that works out. Could make them quite strong, especially with these flat base health buffs. They've lowered push force applied by a Scab class Dreg Gunner by 70%. So that's a nice little nerf to the Gunners, because Gunners were really, really debilitating. And our push force has been reduced by 70%. Beautiful stuff. They're going to be less debilitating now, thank goodness. They've tweaked Scab Stalker combat ranges to increase distance where they switch from melee to ranged attacks. And Scab Shooters can now trigger unsuccessful dodge procs, which is just a little bug fixed. And they fixed so Scab Bombers will only drop his grenade once pin pull sound is played. Good stuff. That just means Scab Bombers aren't going to be, you know, dropping grenades when they've not even pulled the pin. Nice little bug fixes coming on the tail end there. For spawning, they fixed an issue that caused more flamers to be able to be spawned at the same time than intended, and added more aggressive speedrunning prevention spawning, and fixed an issue where the monstrous specials condition would fail to set weakened state. So, more aggressive speedrunning prevention. They're really trying to stop you from, you know, jumping down on lower difficulties and absolutely gunning through to get your contracts up. Interesting. And the monstrous specials one, we already knew that was a bug already. It's pretty sad to see it go, as having non-weakened monstrosity spawn constantly was actually a challenge that was possible to beat, and it made it a lot better, but oh well. Monstrous Specials is still incredibly fun, regardless. We have specific changes to mutants, where they've improved dodging when mutant charges players around corners. They've added an extra wall collision raycast, so mutants running around corners are just going to they're not going to beeline for you as easily, which will make them a bit easier to dodge. I wish they could do this for Poxbursters as well, because they love to fly around corners mid-jump. It defies physics, and it's pretty incredible to see when it happens. They've lowered the Plague Ogryn stomp radius. This was massively powerful, as they've buffed it to move to the back of the Ogryn as well, and if that's just reduced a little bit, but still goes from behind, it'll make it a little bit less daunting to combat against. And they've tweaked the Beast of Nurgle slime slow from 50 to 20, as well as fixing a crash that could occur if two Beasts of Nurgle try to consume at the same enemy. So a little nerf to the Beast of Nurgle means you're going to be able to run away from it a lot faster in its slime, its horrible sludge. And you won't crash if two of them try to gobble you up. That's a pretty unique circumstance, but nice to see bug fixes coming in. Here's where we get to the general weapon changes. What I'm going to do is, because Part 2 and 3 go through all of the specific details on the weapon changes, I'm going to cover the general bits on Part 1, because it would take me in excess of 3 hours to read all of the changes on Part 2 and 3. You don't want to listen to me waffle to that extent. So I'll go through the general changes. You check out the specific buffs or changes to your weapons on Part 2 and 3. I'll leave links in the description down below. But just so you know, there is a lot of buffs in here. So be excited. Check out the weapons you love using. And I'll just get right into the general weapon changes. So they've reduced bleed damage from 200 to 175, Just a flat nerf to bleed damage overall there. Bleed was incredibly strong, so they're just tuning that down a little bit to make sure it's not as potent. They've increased sprint acceleration for ranged assault sprint weapons, so that's for infantry autoguns, recon lasguns, so anything that is quick to shoot and shoots fast, you got a little bit more acceleration for sprinting for those. They've fixed recoil so it doesn't increase while crouched for some weapons, a nice little bug. And rending no longer increases stagger strength. So rending now just increases your damage, it doesn't stagger enemies crazily. For dueling swords, they've changed chain windows on all swords to have faster access to weapon special attacks. They've adjusted cleave values with a slightly increased power on stab heavy attack. They've improved the armor damage modifier versus unyielding and flak on the stab heavy, and changed chain windows on all swords to have faster access to weapon special. They've said that twice now. They should probably proofread these things, but we know that they don't do that, do we? So, oh well. Dueling sword buffs. This is a very interesting one. If you have not used the Mark IV dueling sword, I think you should, as it is quite possibly the most powerful weapon in the game. Powerful melee weapon, sorry. It's the most powerful melee weapon in the game. You can only get it for a Psyker, so build your Psyker up, get this weapon, and destroy everything with it. We'll move on. Heavy swords have had a little buff where they've set the same damage profile for the first and second target, so you'll do the same amount of damage to the second target as the first, rather than doing reduced damage to the second target. Flat buff for the heavy swords, good stuff. They're increasing Maniac armor damage modifier for the chain axe, so chain axe get a little bit more love. Reginald, rejoice! The chain axe getting buffed, woo! And we move on to the kickback, which has a faster auto reload after shooting hip/zoomed, got an increased power, and it has a bit tighter spread with ADS, as well as a minimum pellet hit count changed from 10 to 16 for both hipfire/ADS on all armor types, except flak and unyielding. So just flat buffs for the kickback, which means it's going to be more powerful. It'll stagger more, do more damage, have more range, reload faster, it's got a tighter spread when you're aiming down sights. All very, very good stuff. It could be actually super strong. We'll have to see how powerful that is when this patch comes through. For the Grenadier Gauntlet, they've tweaked values on melee attacks to make it more viable, and they've fixed an issue where heavy melee attacks did not allow for talents such as Batter to proc as intended. So if you love to jump into the fray with the Grenadier Gauntlet and smash people with the melee special attack, it's going to do a nice little bit more damage. The specific numbers are in part 2 or 3. Check those out if you like this weapon. For the Ripper Guns, they've reduced the base reload speed from 30% to 20%, and they slightly reduced the ammo reserve. So the Ripper Guns just getting flat nerfs here. Less ammo, slower reload, pretty sad stuff. They were pretty strong before. It's never nice to see guns getting nerfed, especially when so much buffs are coming through. Rip Ripper Guns. So the Four Swords, they've fixed an issue with smart targeting of the Four Sword, push follow-up being overly prioritized, and increased the lights and heavy attacks damage with a bit increased cleave and finesse. Of course, the grammar is always failing us again. Please get someone to proofread these next time. And they've changed Four Swords' dodge limit from infinite to 5. Rest in peace, Four Sword users who like to dodge infinitely into the fray. No longer can you do that. It still has a very large amount of dodges, at 5, the same as the combat knife, but by no means as strong as it was before. But it is getting extra damage and increased cleave and finesse as well, so it will be a lot stronger to go into combat with. Moving on to infantry lasguns, which have improved sprint ready uptime for all lasguns, improved hipfire recoil spread for all lasguns as well, and increased power. So all of the infantry lasgun variants are getting an increase in power. The Mark IV is getting buffed to the amounts that the MG1A has right now, and the MG1A is getting an increased buff further as well. Check those out in the other parts. It'll be interesting to see whether these can live up to the MG12 now, as the MG12 is just the best infantry lasgun. It's hands down, it can't be competed with currently. So I'm going to try out the other variants for the infantry lasguns again, and see if they're worth picking up over the 12. For now, let's move on to the last pistol buffs, where they've increased the power, reduced the sprint ready uptime, and slightly increased fire rate, and they've also tweaked recoil, spread, and stability to be far less severe, focused on stability even when mobile, and they've tweaked the input buffer so as to reduce the feeling of lost inputs. Flat buffs to the last pistol, more damage, faster sprints, shoots faster, and it's easier to shoot stably. Great stuff. For the Thunder Hammers, they've added one more dodge, which is good because they're very heavy, and you did feel quite immobile with them. It's nice to have one more dodge, means you're going to be able to survive a little bit easier with them. They've switched the Crucis's Mark II Thunder Hammer's push follow-up to be a light sweep, and they've switched the Iron Helm activated strike down heavy sweeping profile to a heavy single target profile, meaning it will be more effective against single targets. And they've also switched Iron Helm chain push follow to heavy 3 for easier access, which means when you use a push, you'll follow it up with the overhead heavy attack, which is going to be a very interesting chain. It means you'll be able to access that a lot easier. The overhead heavy attack does the most damage in its attack chain. And we have the Crusher, the weapon that's used the least in the game. Let's see if they're going to make it useful. It's been changed to be more of a fast, crowd-controlling, headshotting focused weapon. They've added one more dodge to it, and they've tuned the lights/heavy's damage profile to be more efficient, with a focus on headshotting. They've increased the heavy hitbox length from 1.15 to 1.4, they've tuned up the attack speed, and switched the push follow-up to a light sweeping with higher finesse. Reduced light and heavy activation explosion radius, with larger decrease on light attack. So, the activated light and heavy explosion radius has been nerfed, but the rest of the weapon has been buffed quite substantially. So we've got a longer heavy attack hitbox, which means you'll be able to reach out and hit more enemies. It's got more attack speed and an extra dodge. It'll be very interesting to see how viable this weapon is to use now, as beforehand, all it really did was push enemies around. I know some people swear by it being really good because it had crowd control in that aspect, but let's be honest, it was useless, and it'll be interesting to see if it cannot be useless after this patch. Next up we have Tactical Axes, where only the Aatrox Mark II is getting a change, and they've tuned up the single target damage for Light 1 and Light 3, so a minor buff for the Aatrox Mark II Tactical Axe. And we've got Ogryn Changes, so they've increased the attack speed of heavy attacks on the Brunt Basher's Mark 3B Bully Club, and they've tuned down the impact a bit on the slap to avoid juggling enemies in the air. They've also fixed the slap so slapping weak spots can stagger stronger elites such as Crushers, which is very nice. It means that the slap on all of the Bully Clubs is going to become much more of a utility, which will help you chain heavy attacks more. They've added chain to heavy attack 1 from push follow-up, and slightly increased the chain time. So you can push chain into heavy attack 1, which is the overhead strike. The easiest chain is to overhead strike 1, slap, and then you can chain back into overhead strike 1 again. It's faster and it's much more efficient. It appears their proficient in Microsoft Office person has lied yet again as we go into Devil's Claw Mark 7 in the Ogryn Club bullet points. Very interesting. Well, okay, so the Devil's Claw Mark 7's push follow-up has been switched to a single target damage profile, following attack change to a sweeping profile, meaning the first attack will be more useful versus one target, and the following attack more useful with multiple targets. Never really used the Devil's Claw Mark 7, I've only ever used the Mark 4, so you'll have to let me know if you're excited about this change down below. And for combat axes, they've only changed the Acklys, so they've added chain to heavy attack 1 from push follow-up, and slightly reduced the chain time, so you can heavy attack 1 from the push, and you can do it a lot faster. Again, I've never used the Acklys, as the Antax and Rashad are much better. I'm probably still just going to avoid that axe, unless they do something special with it. I'm just going to move on. Now we reach autoguns. There's a lot of buffs and changes for autoguns here. Let's go through them. So for the Bash Weapons Special, they've tweaked hitboxes to be easier to hit, they've increased the speed of the normal/heavy bash, and added a chain window from hip shoot, so shooting will lock you out from firing as much. So that's an interesting little buff for the bashing, weapon bashing. We'll just have to wait and see to see how that interacts with the game. On paper, it doesn't seem like it's going to be amazing, as I'm not sure many people bash with the weapons, but let's move on, shall we? The Vrax Mark III Hedgehunter autogun has had its recoil behavior tweaked. The Mark 7 has also had the same, as well as an increased damage per shot, but it's got a decreased fire rate. And the Agrippina Mark 8 Headhunter autogun has its chained burst time from 0.175 to 0.1, which means it's going to shoot faster. With braced auto guns, they've replaced the push on weapon special to a sweep. They've added stagger reduction on bash hit, which is higher on a weak spot hit, and they've tweaked hitboxes to make them a little bit easier to hit, as well as increasing the speed of the normal and heavy bash. I didn't even know there was a normal and heavy bash between these weapons, to be honest. That's how little I used the weapon bash and special attack on these. It looks like they're trying to make the special attacks on ranged weapons more viable to use to get you out of a pinch. If you have an auto gun out, you can quickly bash an enemy to get it out your face, and then you can shoot it. I think that's what they're probably going for here. I didn't really use them that often before. We'll have to see if they become useful after the patch update. We come to the bolt gun, the Emperor's finest, the most iconic weapon in 40k. They've replaced push on the weapon special to a sweep, and they've added stagger reduction on bash hit, which is higher on the weak spot hit. They tweaked hitboxes to be a bit easier to hit, as well as increasing the speed of the normal/heavy bash, so it's the same as all the other autoguns we've been through, which just means that it should become more of a utility to special attack smack an enemy to hopefully give you just a moment of space to breathe so you can shoot them down. And they've increased the power of the bolt gun. So power, for anyone that doesn't know, is essentially just all stat bonus increase. And so that's really, really beautiful stuff. You'll have to check out the specifics in part 2 and 3, because I'm not going to read them. I've been waffling on for a long time already, and we're still not finished. So, a flat buff to the bolt gun, the most iconic weapon in 40k. Good to see he's coming back into power. And we have infantry auto gun changes. So, all infantry auto guns have had their crit effect to be less flashbangy, so it should be less blinding to get a lot of critical hits. So that's just the muzzle flash won't flash as much if you get a critical hit, so you'll be able to see a lot more. All infantry autoguns have had their ammunition increased, so both the clip and the reserve is higher, so you'll be able to shoot longer, and you'll also have more ammunition throughout the match. The Agrippina Mark 1 has had its recoil tweaked, where they fixed faulty crouch settings that caused recoil to go up when crouching, so that was a bug fix mentioned earlier in the notes. We've got reduced recoil on the first 3 shots, so you'll be able to burst fire more stably, as well as increased recoil when moving to a more of around 2 times that of being stationary. So very nice buffs for the recoil on the Agrippina Mark 1. Let's see what we've got further into the other variants. For the Mark 5, they've also tweaked recoil, reducing horizontal by a lot. They fixed faulty crouch settings that caused it to go up when crouching. They've increased the sprint speed and the dodge, and they've changed the damage profile to be more effective at close range, with far range fall-off. They've set the same fall-off range as other infantry autoguns, with a slightly reduced vertical recoil. It's sad that it's going to have some damage fall-off at range with the Columnus Mark 5, it was quite fun to use at a range, but I suppose they're just trying to egg you on to run really quickly into the fray. You get more dodges, you're more nimble, and you should be able to easily attack enemies at close range with this weapon now. That's what they're focusing on. I'm personally wounded that I won't be able to shoot at range anymore. That's just because my playstyle with the veteran is that of staying far back and just peppering everything from a distance. And the Mark 8 has had its recoil also tweaked, and they've fixed the crouch bug as well as increasing the sprint speed for that weapon. So nice flat buffs for all of the infantry autoguns there. Very good stuff. I think these are mainly changes that the Zealot's going to be able to leverage a lot easier, which means these will become more viable weapons for zooming around the map as a Zealot Preacher a lot more. Next up we have Force Staves. So they've tweaked the fire times on Force Staves with a projectile primary attack. The fire time is now 0.1 seconds, up from 0.025. The animations and timescales have been tweaked to better match the fire time. So that's essentially a change to all the staffs that aren't the Purgatus staff that shoot the little projectile ball forward, as the Purgatus has a burst of fire. It just means you'll be able to shoot not as fast. So it's a minor nerf, but not the end of the world. I never really used the primary attack. I'm sure many of you don't use it very often either. We're not really going to feel that difference. They've tweaked the special attack bash, which is yet more focused on special attacking with ranged weapons. It's slightly faster, and they've changed the profile to be similar of other bash changes, which is higher stagger on weak spot hit, higher on heavy, more cleave on sweep. They've increased the hitbox range and tweaked the chain timings. They've also fixed the impacts, SFX/VFX on the special attacks to be blunt. Just like all of the auto guns and the weapons above, they're really putting a focus on special attacks being able to become more of a utility to pinch you out of a difficult situation if you have that ranged weapon equipped. Now we have Ogryn Cleavers. So they fixed so the uppercut special can stagger heavy targets such as crushers. Woohoo! So the Cleavers had an uppercut hit just like the shovel, but it's always been a lot weaker than the shovel's one. It looks like it's going to be just as powerful, though the shovel's one is actually broken and doesn't stagger crushes at the moment, and it's definitely a bug, especially if this has been fixed so it can stagger heavy targets. I hope I see that fixed later on this, otherwise they're going to need to fix that or I'm going to be mad, because the shovel's amazing and it's really annoying how the uppercut staggers everything but crushes. Maybe this fix changes that and they just don't note it. I wouldn't be surprised, because there's a lot of things they never note in patch changes that are always changed in the game. We shall see. So we've just got some changes to the battle maul and the slab shield, where the push radius has been increased from 3.25 to 4. They've tuned the chain timings. So you'll be able to push more enemies, and the chain timings I assume are faster, so you'll be able to attack more as well. The standard issue Monitorum Sapper Shovel, which is the Veteran Sharpshooter's shovel, they've tuned chain timings as well here, making them better, as well as increasing the damage of light and heavies. So a flat damage buff to the Sapper Shovel. It definitely needed it, as it was falling off a little bit behind all of the other weapons. Good stuff there, and a nice little flat buff. The Katakan Mark III Combat Blade, which is the knife, has had its lights and heavies tweaked, and they've tuned the chain windows as well. They've added innate 25% backstab damage bonus to heavy attacks as well. So nice little buffs to the knife. Let's hope this buff chain continues. For the Power Sword, the Monitorum Mark VI Power Sword block's cost has been reduced by 25%, and the activation can be cancelled to block 0.3 seconds in, keeping the activation. That is absolutely amazing. You're a bit more survivable with the Mark VI now, as you'll be able to block attacks more efficiently, as well as keeping the activation if you've blocked attacks just after you activated it. So the activation animation can be cancelled now. Good stuff. And you can block. This means you'll be able to skip past the really long zzz, then waiting for that to come so you can swing. So absolutely good stuff. Means it's going to be a lot more fluid. You'll be able to attack a lot quicker. So the activated attack for the Power Sword has been buffed significantly. Heavies will have a focus on horde clear, lights for a DPS on smaller target counts. The push attack weak spot hits for carapace and unyielding damage have been buffed as well. So activated Power Swords are just going to do more damage. Very nice stuff, as they were slightly falling behind. They've not seen a lot of love in a long time, especially after the really heavy nerfs they had a long time ago. So nice to see they're getting a nice little bit of love again. And we have the Void Strike, which is a very, very, very powerful weapon. The chain timing from start to the next projectile set to quell chain time. Chain timing from start to next projectile set to quell chain time. Oh, I wish they made this more readable. My brain doesn't make sense of this. Oh, fatshark, please sort out your fucking English, man. This is ridiculous. I don't understand what this means. I'm just going to move on. Slightly reduced the previous 70% buff applied to secondary fire to tune down extreme damage on high health targets. Here is the Void Strike nerf. We've all enjoyed the weapon, as it's been stupendously overpowered since patch 13. It's getting a nerf come patch 14. But that Surge Blessing is still going to make it an absolute monster. Get that Blessing, it's still going to be ridiculously overpowered. Mark my words. The Surge Staff is added gibbing to Surge Staff kills. Very nice. Nice little buff to the Surge Staff there. The Rumbler is having reduced sway to make aiming trajectory more reliable. And they've added a crosshair during reload. So the Rumbler is just going to be a bit easier to aim for those of you who struggle to aim the weapon. Human shotguns, though they could have just said combat shotguns. They've upped the ammo pools, very nice. The ammo pools on shotguns was dreadful, and so they're getting a little bit of a buff there. And they've also increased armor damage modifiers versus unarmored, infested, maniac, and unyielding. So more damage. Great, the shotguns didn't get a buff in patch 13. Good to see they're finally getting some love in patch 14. So you shotgun lovers, be able to run out there, shotgun things a little bit more effectively. And we have the M35 Magna Core Mark II plasma gun, my favourite gun in the game. One of my favourite guns in 40k lore. It's got increased power, increased cleave, and increased finesse. It's going to do more everything. It's going to go through everything, and it's going to do more damage to heads, as well as shooting faster. Oh my god. Absolutely beautiful. This gun has fallen off since patch 13. Come patch 14, this is going to be an absolute monster. I'm going to make it a build for this. Stay tuned for it. It's going to be amazing. And they've changed aiming of grenades to update aiming trajectory up to the point of throwing the projectile. Good stuff. Just means you're going to have a little bit more clarity when throwing your grenade. There's a couple of general blessing changes which I'll quickly speed through before coming to a close on the video. I've been waffling quite a long time now, so yeah, we'll just get through these really quickly. Fire Frenzy has been changed from attack speed to close damage, so you'll get 5 stacks of 7 to 10% close damage, which means if you got Fire Frenzy in any of your weapons, it's going to do a lot of damage if you're stacking those buffs up. Strip Down has been fully reworked into a solely ranged attack immunity blessing, thus the sprint speed bonus has been removed. We want to keep the movement speed bonuses in the talent tree layer instead. So anyone with Strip Down, which gave you extra sprint speed as well as ranged attack immunity depending on how much stamina you had, the sprint speed's getting removed. It's quite a sour little nerf as it was nice, and it's going to make you run slower if you're going for movement speed generally in your build. So that's sad to see that go, but it's not the end of the world. Still a sad little nerf though. They've changed speed load from triggering on melee kill to close kill, adding stacking of bonuses up to 5 stacks. For Limb Splitter, the cooldowns have been tweaked. Ruthless Backstab's rending bonus has been increased. Infernus for the Recon Lasguns specifically has had its maximum burn stacks increased. Can Opener's Brittleness stacks has been doubled, which is going to make it quite a strong pick. It was already a very strong pick for the Rippers. There is a plethora of bug fixes, which I think I'm going to leave you to have a read over, as well as miscellaneous changes. And then that brings us to the end of Part 1. As I said, Part 2 and Part 3 have hundreds upon hundreds of specific weapon changes that I'm not going to go into because it will take me hours to go through all of them. And to be honest, yeah, I mean, check this out, right? So just look at how terribly formatted this is. Look at this giant list of changes. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, isn't it? I mean, if you look at so if we just look at this first bit here, right? Look at the space in between these lines. And then if we go to Part 1, the spacing here at the top is normal. If they did this, that would reduce at least 1 full page. I don't know why they've not done this. Yeah, I'm proficient in Microsoft Office. Honest. You know, I practiced it at high school. Clearly, they've just, yeah, this is, yeah. I'm just gonna leave it there. there's lots of beautiful buffs in patch 14, so look forward to all of those amazing buffs. I'm excited for the plasma gun and the bolt gun, as well as all of the Ogryn buffs, and I'm really excited to try out the other variants of the infantry lasgun to see if they're now viable. And I'm sure there's a million things I've forgotten because I've read all of them and they're all out of my head as I'm a bit cooked now. But there is a lot to look forward to. Hopefully patch 14 comes out before the anniversary update, because the only thing missing here is no new maps, no new content. I hope that they're saving the big jewel for the anniversary update. We need new maps, because what good is it having all of these class updates and all these weapon buffs if we're doing the same thing over and over again? But as always, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. Right, that's enough of my waffle. Following patch 14, I'll be sure to be drafting a lot of builds, specifically some for the plasma gun, bolt gun, infantry lasguns, and I'll get into the bully clubs as well as the shovel, and I'm sure there's going to be many other things as well. So drop a subscribe if you would like to stay tuned for my upcoming buffs and tips and tricks for Damnation as well, as that will be coming out soon. And I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.